was born in 1923, July the 28th, at 4116 Fairfield Avenue, Fort Wayne, Indiana, in the home of Silas and Rosanna Sprunger. I was the first male child in that family, and they were quite elated to have a male child. About the first thing that I can remember is when we lived on John Street in Fort Wayne. I had attended the Precious Blood School on Oxford Street in Fort Wayne, and there's where I attended the first grade. I can remember a number of things that we had interurbans or streetcars, and it would go by pretty close to our house, and I would walk to school. Sometimes Mother would walk with me because I was very small, but that's about the first that I can remember. And we went to the Friends Church in Fort Wayne at the corner of Anthony and Antoinette. That's where we went to church.
That church still there?
That church is still there, and it's not a Friends Church anymore. It's a Spanish church now. But then later on, we moved to Leo, Indiana, because Dad had lost many jobs because the work was hard to come by because of the Depression. And how we got to go to Leo in Grayville, Indiana, we moved because Mother had a dream that we would have a place that we would live, that we would have a lot of things to eat, unlimited. But let me go back just a little bit. Let's go back to another place that I can remember so vividly would be Crickville, Indiana. And we were so very poor. Dad could not get a job. And we bought coal in a coaster wagon. We'd buy 15, 20 cents worth of coal at a time. We burned a lot of corn cobs because we just didn't have any money. And I was in the third grade then. I remember my teacher, my third grade teacher was a man named Mr. Lee when I attended there. And one time I got caught doing something and he spanked me with a shingle, which I can vividly remember. The shingle flew apart. He spanked me so hard. So then we attended the Wesleyan Church in Bluffton. We didn't have money for gas. We drove when we could, but many times we couldn't because we didn't have any money for gas. Sometimes I went across the street to the little church there. I've forgotten what denomination it was, but we attended that little church sometimes when we couldn't go anywhere else.
You spoke only John till...
When I first started the school, I could not speak English. I could just speak Swiss. And
Grandpa only spoke Swiss.
Mostly. And Grandpa Silas spoke Swiss, and so that's all I could speak was Swiss. And I can vividly remember a little bit in Fort Wayne when after we lost the house on John Street, Dad built a little house, was a little garage house, just a very small house. We lived there for a while. But then as work got worse and worse, Dad could not get a job. Then we moved to Leo and Grayville, and I went from grades 3 through 7 there at Leo, and we lived on the farm. We rented and worked on a farm for Jake Schwartz, and Dad farmed the Don and I were much older, and neither one of us had ever been around any farm things at all. We used to try to ride the pigs, and we had to learn how to milk cows. And one time, Don was on one side of the cow, and I was on the other, and we had little half-gallon buckets, and we began to milk, and we both got kicked pretty hard because she didn't like to be milked 2 at once. So we got kicked pretty hard. But anyway, we had a lot of fond memories. While we lived there, we attended the Pascal's Tabernacle in Fort Wayne. But I can think of many, many things that Dad showed us how to do, how to make whistles, how to make slingshots, how to hunt safely. And I have lots and lots of favorite memories. One particular thing I can remember right now is we had a large Holstein bull that was for sale, and he was very mean. We kept him in a large enclosed area with steel bars, and the day he was to be sold, there's a guy came and they loaded him up, and Don and I climbed clear up to the top of the windmill so the bull couldn't get us. And we thought that he could. We told Mother that he'll never get us up here, and he didn't. But we learned how to milk cows. We learned how to harness horses. We learned how to plant things. And one time that was so dry in the summer that Dad had a little tomato patch in the garden, and he irrigated it. And we pumped water at the well with an old gasoline engine and irrigated the tomatoes, and they're very good. We sold tomatoes to all of our friends and neighbors.
Back up to the story you were saying about Grandma had that dream and everything. So.
Okay, back to the dream. We were so poor, that was at Craigville, and we just didn't hardly have enough to eat. And Grandma, my mother, Matilda, had a dream.
Yes.
That one day we were going to move someplace, and there would be eggs and fruit and vegetables and anything that you can imagine. And Dad thought it was kind of strange that Mother would have a dream like that. But that dream really came true. It was shortly after that we got a chance to move to the Jake Swartz farm right close to Cedarville, Indiana, and that's where we lived. And that very thing that Mother had dreamed about came about. We had berries, apples, strawberries, anything you can imagine. We had our own eggs and our own milk. We had our own meat. And we
that house that Christine and Rosie.
Yes, that's that. So we had a real good time there, and we enjoyed when we would. A lot of times our relatives, Joanna and Opal, and all of them would come out from Fort Wayne, and we'd play ball, and those are some fond memories I had. They thought we lived in practically heaven because we fished and swam in Cedar Creek. And one time, then after we moved away from there, we moved down the road about not quite a mile to the Arthur Wilkes place. That's where we lived in for a number of years. And to make ends meet, Dad couldn't do carpenter work. We put out a 5-acre garden. And we had radishes, and we had carrots, and all these things that we would harvest. I still love gardening. We washed all these things, tied them up in bunches, and Dad took them to Fort Wayne, and Mother made Dutch cakes, and she made cottage cheese. You didn't have to have a Board of Health license in those days. And he'd go to Fort Wayne and sell those things and make a few dollars and bring them home. We had our own cow. One time while I was milking the cow, Rosanna came into the shed. We had a drive-in right in front of the cow stanchions, or the cow stall. And Rosanna came in there to get something out of the car and spooked the cow, and she kicked me and got me underneath her and stomped on my back with both hoofs. And they thought for a while that I had a broken back, but it all turned out okay. But we lived there, and then later on, Dad was able to, in 1936, we moved to Monroe, Indiana. Dad got a job with his brother Hubert to do construction work. And as I remember, the wages that day was about 35 cents an hour. But we had plenty of money. It seemed like that Mother could make things reach.
This house here.
No, that was where Russell Stump lives now. We rented a house from Lou Stump. And from there we moved to Otto Longenberger's house. That's a mile south of the road. Yes, then we moved. Stump lives 3 miles south, or east. 3 miles east. Then we moved from there to Otto Longenberger's house. That's 1 mile east of here. That's where we lived then until we bought this.
This house, when you bought it, didn't stand here.
No, it was the Grandstaff house. Dr. Grandstaff. It was just a mile, as the crow would fly, about a mile northeast from here in a field. And Dad bought this house that Grandma lived in for $100. Had no doors or windows. And that's what Dad gave for it. We had Leo Sprunger to move it, but he couldn't move it because he didn't have enough power. So then we have another guy come in by the name of Brent Riley, and he moved it then. And one interesting thing about that house, they came down 100 north, turned on the Van Buren Street Road, and when they got to the bridge, Dad says to Mr. Riley, "What are you going to do now?" "We're going to hit the bridge master." So he said, "We're going to tip the house." So they jacked it up and went over the railing, and that's how they brought it down here. That's hard to believe that actually happened.
But when you moved the house, it wasn't like it is now. You added on some.
We took the kitchen part off because it was just, the smell was bad. We took some of it off, and we just lived. We just had the rooms upstairs and 2 rooms downstairs for a long time.
So there's 4 rooms on.
There was really only 4 rooms.
4 rooms altogether?
Yes. And
then when you added on the bathroom?
The bathroom wasn't added on until much later. We added the kitchen first.
The kitchen was added on.
The kitchen was added on. And then there'll be Joe's bedroom above.
Okay.
And then later on, Dad added the bathroom on later. But Dad remodeled the whole house, built the cabinets, did all the woodwork in it, hung all the doors, and they just added on as they could. My sister Christine asked different times why that took them so long to do things, and I said very simply, they just didn't have the money. That's the reason it took so long.
What kind of floor is it?
It had a subfloor with knot holes in, and one time as a rat came up through one of those knot holes, and Grandma killed it with a broom. So I remember a lot of hard things.
Don't want the snow coming in like this.
Yeah, Mother washed clothes on a washboard for all of us kids. That's why a lot of kids nowadays don't even know what a washboard is. But I can see my mother scrub on our clothes on that washboard up and down to get them clean. And she'd make them real hot, and she had a stick about 2 foot long. She used to lift them up and see if they were clean.
What kind of stove was in the house when you bought it?
We put in an all heater almost immediately.
I know the one time you were saying
Cooking was just
out money, and Grandma said take the wood. Said, well,
that's when we lived at Craigville. Yeah. Dad had went and looked for work, and he had no money, and he didn't come back. It was on a Sunday afternoon, and Mother said, "I'm getting awfully worried." She related to me more than some of the rest because I was older. And she said, "I think I see Dad." And we looked off the distance, and if I wouldn't have known it, I wouldn't know who that was. He was limping. He was nearly froze to death. And he came in the house, and Mother put him up real close to the stove and put a blanket around him and told him, she said, Grandpa's awful cold. His lips, I remember, they were real thick, and he could hardly talk. And she told me to take the axe and go out and chop the floor out of the woodshed. We got to warm that grandpa up. He's very cold. So we had a roaring fire in just a little while. And to this day, I've never felt bad ever chopping that floor out of that woodshed. I don't feel like it was stealing. I just feel like something it had to be.
Where were you living when the story you tell about the donuts you found in the bush?
Bluffton. We lived in Bluffton there on Johnson Street. I I was walking down Johnson Street, and
how old were you then?
Early grades, 3rd or 4th grade in there someplace, I suppose. 3rd, 4th, or 5th, maybe. I don't know, but
you walking down Johnson Street?
I found a sack of donuts that somebody had dumped underneath a bush. And I looked at them. There were quite a few ants on them. And I took them home to Mother, and I said, what are we going to do with them? So we're going to clean the ants off. We're going to eat them. And we did. We swept all the ants off and ate them.
Yes.
Things are different than you know.
You're hungry enough to buy your things.
But we just, with the first washing machine that I can remember that Mother had was one that had a hand lever on with a gear, and you just hand powered. And on Monday mornings, Don and I used just to hate to see wash day come because we were the motor on the wash machine. And we would get tired and we would say, do you think it's good enough, Mother? And she'd take that stick I told you about and pick them up. And I said, no, they're not clean yet. Give them some more. Mother was very, very particular about the clothes. They had to be clean. In fact, my cousin Opal has said many times, it's one thing I've got to say about your mother. You kids were always clean, and your clothes were always clean. Many of our clothes were made out of men's clothes, men's coats. Mom made coats for all of us with an old Singer sewing machine. We had no money for clothes, and Mom made us clothes. And,
did she make clothes for the girls out of feed sacks?
Yes. She took feed sacks and made slips and panties out of feed sacks for the girls. We had no money. We absolutely couldn't buy anything. Dad made $20 a month in the wintertime and $25 in the summer. And that's whenever we went to town to buy clothes, he would get...
What was some of the prices of food back then, like a loaf of bread?
Okay, you could buy a nice loaf of bread for 5 cents. And we used to buy bologna for 10 cents a pound. And you just... things are very, very reasonable. Dad used to buy shotgun shells 3 or 4 at a time. He used to split a box. He couldn't afford a whole box. So he would buy just a few and go out, and so we'd have some fresh meat. That's where I learned to eat rabbits, but Dad would bring them home. He wouldn't shoot at them until he knew he could get them. But later on, then we moved here, and Grandma's house is here on Van Buren Street, and that's where I went into the service then. I graduated from high school when we lived here.
Graduated high school from where?
Monroe High School. And that school was long gone. It's been torn down. It's right where the Methodist Church stands now.
Okay.
And so that's where I went to school. Don went there some too. But then the rest of Joe, he went to Adams Central then. But that was long afterward.
I want the story about Milo and the bull with a cow or something.
No, that's when we lived at Schwartz's. A lot of times didn't have anything to do, and so Dad said, let's have a milking contest. We had 13 cows to milk. And so Dad says, let's have a milking contest. And so there was one cow that it was just fresh, and I knew she'd have a lot of milk, so I thought I would milk her, and I surely could win the contest. Dad offered some kind of a reward, I don't know what, but it was something worthwhile. And it was a box stall, and I went in with her, and she just kept kicking me. She kicked me terribly. She just didn't like me at all. She knew she could buffalo me, and Uncle Milo was watching from a distance, and I didn't know he was watching. And he finally walked over there, and he said, "What's wrong, Virgil?" And I began to cry. And he went in there and he worked the cow over and he sat down and milked her. She knew full well that if she kicked him, I'd go home to the end of the road. Well, I tell you what, he had a temper like a... But I and Uncle Milo were always very, very close. It just...
Tell the story about the scoops in the barn.
That's when we lived at Jake's. Uncle Milo used to come out from Fort Wayne, and he'd walk 13 miles. He could do it in 3 hours. And he'd walk. He could pride that he could walk that in 3 hours, 13 miles. So one night it was real hot, and he said, "Let's go spook hunting." And of course, Don was quite a bit younger, and his eyes got real big, but he didn't want to say he didn't want to go. So Grandpa, my dad, took the shotgun, and we each had clubs and all sorts of things. And we went back in the berry patch, and the pigs were back there laying along the fence. It was real hot. And every once in a while they'd grunt and make a noise, and Uncle Milo would say, "You hear them? You hear them?" and Don was just about ready to go for the house. But Don's imagination was really... Another interesting thing that happened, one time when we lived there at Schwartz's, Don and I were walking down the lane, and all at once I saw a large blue racer. And we were both barefooted, and I told Don, "There's a snake." And he headed for the house. He ran just as hard as he could go. And I said, "Come back here. We're going to kill that snake." So we jumped over the fence, and we looked for some stones. And stones were very plentiful there. You had a lot of stones. And for a little bit, we lost the snake. But the dog found him, and then we killed him with stones. He kept throwing stones on until we killed him. But Don remembers that, too. I just related that to him not long ago. I can see his bare feet going yet as he ran toward the house. When I said, "There's a snake," he ran as hard as he could go. But...
Tell the story about you said a little bit ago about the teacher in the long division.
That was when I was going to legal school. I began to cry one noon. I couldn't get my long division. And there's a lady by the name of Elizabeth Akey came up to me, a very, very good Christian lady, and she put her arm around me. She says, "Don't cry, Virgil. I can help you get those lessons. Today we're going to learn how to do long divisions." And on her noon hour, she sat there with me, and we went over and over, and I was able to learn long division because she had.
What kinds of things did you used to pack in the lunch? Anything?
Jelly bread and once in a while we'd have meat, and mostly jelly breads. That's all we had, and Mom would put in maybe an apple in. We had no oranges. We just had what we had. Sometimes she'd put a jar of applesauce in. Mom was a real good cook. She made homemade bread. She made grape nuts, all sorts of things to keep the wolf away from the door. And but the lunch was...
You related before, especially doing your pour about eating, like hot potatoes or something, share or give most of food.
When we would work in the garden, Mother would say, "You boys are working hard. I'll give you my piece of meat." She said, "I don't work so hard and I don't need meat." Because we'd be hoeing in the garden or whatever, and she felt sorry for us to give us an extra piece of meat. And I remember those things real well. One time we had, Dad went to, when we lived in Leo, or Craigville, Dad said, "I'm going to go and get some bread." And he went down to the grocery and asked for some bread. And the guy said, "I can't give you any bread if you don't have any money." So Dad came home and he was crying. And he told Mother, he said, they won't give me any bread. And Mother took her coat off the rack and she went down to the grocery and she walked into the same man and said, I want 2 loaves of bread. And she came back with the 2 loaves of bread. He knew better than to tell Mom no. Because she said she didn't say anything but just give me 2 loaves of bread. And there was only a nickel a loaf. But we just didn't have any money. And Dad used to make little nightstands out of the ends out of an orange crate for the top, and he'd take willows and willow sticks from along the river and bend them and make the bracings and the legs. Buy a little bit of aluminum or gold paint and doctor them up and sell them for 15, 20 cents or half a dollar. And he was always very ingenious in trying to make things go. We buried apples. We didn't have a refrigerator. We buried apples. We dug a big hole in the garden, put straw in there, and then we'd lay the apples in there and then cover it over. And in the wintertime, we used to go out and take the axe and chop a hole through the ice, frozen ground, and then you'd reach back in that snow and in that straw, and there would be the apples in there. They were just as good, and they weren't frozen because they were protected. So we didn't have any. Nobody had a refrigerator. Kept your milk in a room that was cooler or whatever. And we burned wood, and those that had money burned coal. But
How about Christmas memories? What did you see for Christmas?
Christmas, one Christmas I can vividly remember, Dad gave Don and me, I don't remember what the rest of the kids got, but Don and I each got a quarter. And he told us to go down to hardware. There was a little hardware store in Craigville, and we each bought a quarter pocket knife, and that's what we had for Christmas, and that was it. And we just was elated. And we always, when they could later on, we'd put a bowl of candy on the table. Every kid got a bowl of candy. And in the bowl of candy would be some goodies. I can remember Dad sometimes would stick a box of bullets in there or a pocket knife, or for the boys and for the girls, they'd get some other little trinket. But
that was your Christmas.
That was our Christmas, yeah. But we never went hungry. Mother was a tremendous cook, and she could make something with almost nothing. And homemade bread, like I mentioned before, and a lot of things. But I'm not one bit ashamed of my heritage because we were poor. I think it did something for me. I think I appreciate things more today because of. But the best thing of all, I mentioned this at Dad's funeral. Of all the things that Dad left me was never once did he fail to ask God's blessing on the meal. How meager it was. It maybe was just bread and milk or bread and gravy. When we lived in Craigville, we bought skim milk for 5 cents for half a gallon. And that's all the milk we had, skim milk. 5 cents for half a gallon. The man that sold it to us had money. He could have easily given it to us, but he never failed to charge us for that milk, skim milk. And that's all the milk we had. And Mother's health was very bad, too. A lot of times she couldn't go to church. She had gum disease. Later then, she had her teeth taken out. Dr. Stingley from Spencerville, Ohio, took her teeth out and made her a set of teeth in. And I can remember when we came home, he wanted Mom to chew gum to learn how to use those teeth, and they didn't fit very well, and she cried, and she said, I just can't do it. They just kept falling out. And they weren't fit very good, but later on she got a good set in. But those are some of the things that I can remember, especially around Leo and Grayville, some of the fondest memories. When we moved away from there, I and Don both cried. We thought that was the end of the world.
Why did you move?
Dad, because of work.
Oh.
Dad was able to get a job down here. Uncle Hubert wanted us to come and live down here. So later on, Dad got pretty good work. He got So he made pretty decent wages. Got up to maybe 75, 80 cents an hour, which was a fabulous wage for those days. But you had to pay no tax. The only tax you had was personal property tax called poll tax. You didn't pay all the other taxes. There were no taxes. Everybody paid a poll tax called a personal tax. But Dad always took us to church, always on Sunday morning, told us to go to church. He got us up and we didn't argue.